The four-digit price for Lena's medication was an impossible wall. 19-year-old Marco Valerio, guardian to his ailing sister, knew desperation. Yet in his calloused hands, a delicate clockwork bird, crafted from forgotten scrap, issued an impossibly pure, melodic chirp, a fragile defiance in a world of decay. The air in the abandoned freight depot tasted of ozone, rust, and the sharp tang of cold solder. This was Marco Valerio's world. At 19, his life had been compressed into the four cavernous, concrete walls of this forgotten corner of Port Sterling, a city that had long given up on its own future. A year had passed since the factory accident that had taken his father, and the subsequent silence when his mother simply walked away, leaving him the sole guardian of his younger sister, Lena. He had been forced to abandon his studies, his future traded for a present spent coaxing life back into the neighborhood's dead toasters and sputtering radios for pennies and promises. It was enough to keep the single bare bulb overhead lit and put meager food on their makeshift table. But in the shadows, away from the clutter of salvaged appliances, Marco nurtured a secret. Here, amidst heaps of scrap copper, scavenged clockwork, and the guts of discarded motors, he forged miracles. His latest creation rested in his calloused hands. It was a clockwork bird, its body a delicate latticework of polished brass and gleaming gears. For weeks, he had worked in stolen moments, shaping each feather, winding each tiny spring, his focus absolute. This was more than a hobby. It was a silent act of defiance against the crushing weight of his reality. While the world outside was a symphony of decay, his creations were hymns of precision and order. With the delicate click of a watchmaker's tweezers, he set the final component into place, a minuscule escapement mechanism he'd fashioned from the remnants of a shattered pocket watch. He held his breath, then gently wound the key. There was a soft whir, a series of clicks that sounded like a held secret, and then the bird's brass wings gave a tentative flutter. It tilted its head, and from a tiny bellows hidden in its chest, it issued a single, impossibly crisp and melodic chirp. The sound, pure and clear, cut through the damp air, a tiny spark of beauty in the vast, oppressive gloom. It was the only voice in the warehouse that spoke of hope. A squall, born of the gray Atlantic, slammed into Port Sterling with a vengeance. The depot's corrugated iron roof, a patchwork of rust and tenuous hope, groaned under the assault. A sound like tearing metal ripped through the night, and a section of roofing gave way. Water, black and reeking of industrial runoff, cascaded down, not just seeping but gushing. It flooded his workbench, engulfing the line of meticulously repaired electronics. Marco watched in horror as a vintage radio, its warm vacuum tubes just an hour ago brought back to life, short-circuited with a violent pop and a plume of acrid smoke. A week's income, a fragile dam against their mounting debts, dissolved in the deluge. The physical damage was nothing compared to the human cost. The dampness was a malevolent entity, creeping into the thin blankets where Lena slept. Her whimpers of pain, usually a soft counterpoint to the city's hum, sharpened into stifled sobs that tore at the fabric of the night. Marco sat by her side, helpless, watching as her small knuckles swelled to twice their size, her fingers curling into rigid claws. She tried to be brave for him, forcing a watery smile. "It's okay, Marco," she whispered, her voice strained. "The ache just sings a little loud tonight." The metaphor, so innocent and poignant, was a fresh wound in his already bleeding heart. The free clinic was a study in beige despair. The air hung thick with the smell of antiseptic and quiet desperation. A weary, overworked doctor, his eyes shadowed with the city's collective fatigue, delivered the verdict with clinical detachment. Lena needed a new biologic medication, a targeted therapy that could halt the progression of the disease and prevent the permanent, crippling damage that was now a terrifyingly real possibility. He scribbled a name on a prescription pad, a word that looked alien and impossibly complex. At the small pharmacy window, the unofficial quote was a gut punch. The number, a four-digit monolith, seemed to mock him from the slip of paper. It wasn't a price. It was a wall, insurmountable and absolute. Desperation is a powerful, reckless fuel. It drove Marco to the city center's weekend flea market, a chaotic bazaar of cast-offs and forgotten histories. He carefully arranged his mechanical wonders on a rickety card table. The scuttling spider, the miniature orrery, and given pride of place on a velvet scrap, the brass songbird. He hoped for a miracle, for one person to see past the scrap and recognize the soul within. But the crowd was a river of indifference. A teenager pointed and laughed. A well-dressed couple gave his table a cursory glance before being drawn away by the scent of fried dough. His creations, born of genius and solitude, were invisible. The final blow came from a portly antique dealer, his shirt straining at the buttons. He picked up the songbird, his thumbs smudging the polished brass. "Interesting little wind-up," he grunted, poking at the delicate wing mechanism. $20. It'll look nice on a shelf next to some old porcelain." The casual, brutal reduction of his art to a mere shelf ornament shattered something deep inside Marco. He packed his treasures away, the mechanical spider's legs clinking mournfully against the orrery's rings. The weight of failure was a physical ache in his chest, and he felt a hollowing certainty that his talent wasn't just unappreciated. It was a cruel, useless joke. The last flicker of hope had been snuffed out by the cold wind of commerce. Sophia Chen, founder and lead engineer of Etheria Dynamics, navigated the world through a lens of systems, stress tests, and elegant solutions. Her small robotics startup was more than a business. It was a meticulously constructed ecosystem of her own design, a testament to her belief that even the most chaotic problems could yield to elegant engineering. But Etheria was at a critical juncture, a tipping point between scrappy underdog and serious contender. A recent, hard-won round of funding had injected vital capital, but it came with the ironclad expectation of rapid expansion. Their current, cramped downtown workshop, buzzing with the energy of creation, was now a bottleneck, a physical constraint on their ambitions. This stark reality had brought her to the industrial necropolis of Port Sterling. Where others saw decay, she saw potential. Vast, forgotten spaces available for a fraction of the cost, a blank canvas for her company's next chapter. She was walking the perimeter of a derelict textile mill, her practical boots crunching on a carpet of shattered glass and dried leaves, when the sound first reached her. It was faint, a sliver of audio almost lost beneath the mournful moan of the wind through the building's skeletal window frames. A single, crystalline chirp. It was impossibly precise, with a rhythmic, measured quality that was utterly alien to this environment of rust and ruin. It wasn't the organic, slightly wavering call of a real bird. This was different. It was too perfect, too clean, like a note struck on a tuning fork made of glass. As an engineer who had spent the better part of a decade wrestling with the complex, often messy interface between mechanics and lifelike motion, the sound snagged her professional curiosity like a fishhook. It possessed a quality of mechanical purity, a signature of refined design that was both baffling and profoundly intriguing. The sound repeated, a clear, two-note call, a tiny beacon of order in a sea of entropy. It seemed to emanate from the neighboring freight depot, a hulking structure with a visibly sagging roof and windows that stared out like vacant eyes. A no trespassing sign, its letters bleeding rust, hung crookedly from a chain-link fence, a forgotten warning. An instinct she couldn't and didn't try to name took hold. It was the same impulse that had driven her as a child to take apart her father's expensive Swiss watch just to understand its heart. Ignoring the sign, she followed the sound as if drawn by an invisible thread. It led her to a large, corrugated metal door, pulled shut but not latched, leaving a gap of a few inches. The interior was a chasm of deep shadows, smelling of damp earth and something metallic. She hesitated for only a heartbeat, the engineer in her overriding any sense of caution. Drawn by that inexplicable melody, a siren song for a technical mind, she leaned forward and peered through the gap. The sight that met Sophia's eyes was a study in profound, breathtaking contrast. In the center of the cavernous, debris-strewn space, illuminated by a single, low-hanging bulb, a young man sat on an overturned crate. He was an island of intense focus in an ocean of chaos. He was surrounded by what looked like the detritus of a dead technological civilization. Mountains of tangled wires, the skeletal remains of gutted motors, and heaps of rusted sheet metal. It was a landscape of failure. Yet in his hands, cradled with a reverential gentleness, was the source of the sound, the small, gleaming brass bird. He was utterly absorbed, his brow furrowed in a concentration so absolute that the world around him seemed to have dissolved. With a pair of worn-out tweezers, he was making a microscopic adjustment to a gear no bigger than a grain of rice. The environment was pure entropy, but the object in his hands was a masterpiece of order and life. The slight scrape of Sophia's shoe on the concrete floor broke the spell. Marco's head snapped up, his eyes wide with a mixture of surprise and fear. Instantly, he became a cornered animal. He drew the songbird protectively towards his chest, his body tensing as if to shield it from a blow. He expected the usual questions, the ones laced with pity or dismissal. "What is that thing?" Or "What are you doing in here?" But Sophia didn't ask those questions. Her engineer's brain had already bypassed the strangeness of the situation and was zeroing in on the technical brilliance before her. The bird chirped again, and this time, she saw the intricate dance of the gears through the brass latticework of its body. "Your escapement," she said, her voice quiet but clear, carrying across the space with an unexpected authority. "How did you design it? You're not using a standard anchor. Is that a modified grasshopper escapement? And you've repurposed clockwork components to minimize friction." The words struck Marco with the force of a physical impact. They were a secret language, a code he thought only he understood. This stranger didn't see a trinket, she saw a system. She saw the thought, the struggle, the solution. The defensiveness in his posture slowly began to dissolve, replaced by a dawning sense of disbelief. For the first time, perhaps in his entire life, he felt truly seen. He hesitated for a moment, then, with a shy, almost reluctant gesture, he held the bird out. I couldn't get the torque right with a standard anchor," he stammered, his voice rough from disuse. The power loss was too great for the size of the mainspring. As he began to explain his design, pointing out how he'd used polished agate from a broken earring as a low-friction pallet jewel, Sophia listened, completely captivated. She wasn't just impressed, she was humbled. He had solved complex micromechanical problems with nothing but salvaged junk and raw intuition, problems that her team, with their advanced software and state-of-the-art labs, sometimes struggled with for weeks. She recognized the obsessive passion, the deep, innate understanding of physical forces. It reminded her of herself as a teenager, hiding in her parents' garage, taking apart old radios and VCRs, driven by a burning need to understand how things worked. "When I was 15, she shared, her voice softening, "I tried to build a miniature robotic arm out of my dad's erector set and the motor from my mom's hairdryer. My parents thought I was just making a mess." She smiled, a genuine, unforced expression. "They didn't understand that I wasn't just playing. I was trying to answer a question." In that moment, a bridge formed between the successful tech CEO and the broke teenager in a derelict warehouse. It was a bridge built not of sympathy, but of a shared, fundamental truth, the lonely, beautiful, all-consuming passion of a builder. Their conversation flowed, an unexpected current of shared language in the stagnant air of the depot. Marco, hesitant at first, slowly opened up, revealing the miniature universe he had built. He showed Sophia the scuttling spider, explaining how he had mimicked the gait of a wolf spider by creating a non-periodic gear trained from old sewing machine parts. He pointed out the orrery, its tiny planets orbiting with near-perfect celestial timing, all driven by a single, hand-wound clock spring. Each piece was a testament to a mind that saw potential where others saw only refuse. Sophia listened, her initial fascination deepening into a profound respect. She recognized the signs of a rare, intuitive genius, the kind that couldn't be taught in a university lecture hall. As Marco spoke, she also pieced together the fragments of his story: the ever-present worry for his sister, the crushing weight of medical bills, the sting of the flea market's indifference. She could have easily reached for her wallet. A few $1,000s would be a temporary fix, a bandage on a gaping wound. But Sophia saw the fierce pride etched in the lines of Marco's face, the same pride that was embedded in every gear and lever of his creations. Charity would be an insult. It would validate the antique dealer's assessment, reducing Marco's talent to a sob story. She knew that what he needed wasn't a handout, it was a foothold. Reaching into her bag, she pulled out her sleek, minimalist tablet. With a few taps, she brought up a complex 3D rendering, a design that had been a source of intense frustration for her and her team for the past month. "This is a prototype for a microactuator," she explained, her tone shifting from appreciative observer to professional peer. "It's for a robotic arm designed for delicate surgical procedures. We're stuck on the power transmission module for the wrist joint." She zoomed in on a cluster of gears and linkages. "Everything we've tried is either too bulky, generates too much heat, or has a wear and tear rate that's unacceptable for medical use." She turned the screen towards him, not as a test, but as a genuine request for consultation. "I need someone who thinks differently. Someone who isn't trapped by conventional CAD models and established engineering principles. I need someone who understands the soul of the machine, who can feel the solution in their hands." Her gaze was direct, her voice steady and devoid of pity. "I'm not offering you charity, Marco. I'm offering you a job. Etheria Dynamics needs a junior prototype designer. It comes with a salary, and more importantly, it comes with the company's comprehensive health insurance plan, one that will cover every cent of Lena's treatment." Marco stared at the tablet, his mind racing, connecting the abstract digital rendering to the physical principles he knew so intimately. He saw the friction points, the torque stress, the inherent flaws. Then his brain processed her words: salary, job, health insurance. The last two words struck him with the force of a physical blow. Health insurance. It was an incantation, a magical phrase from a world he thought he could never access. The dam of stoicism he had maintained for a year, through grief, poverty, and despair, finally broke. He looked from the glowing screen to Sophia's earnest face, and a single hot tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. Then another. This wasn't pity. This was recognition. This was a lifeline, thrown not to a charity case, but to an equal. 3 months later, the world was a different color. The grimy, monochrome palette of the depot had been replaced by the clean, bright whites and cool blues of the Etheria Dynamics R&D lab. Marco, dressed in a crisp, dark blue work shirt with the company's logo embroidered over the pocket, stood before a large, interactive whiteboard. He was surrounded by a small group of senior engineers, men and women with decades of experience and advanced degrees. "If we reroute the kinetic energy through a parallel cycloidal drive instead of a direct gear train," Marco explained, his voice confident as he sketched a new schematic with a stylus, "we can eliminate the primary friction point and reduce the power consumption by at least 30%. An older engineer, a man named Arthur who had initially been skeptical of the kid from the scrapyard, stroked his chin, a slow smile spreading across his face. "My God," he murmured to no one in particular, "that's brilliantly simple. Why didn't we see that?" Marco's desk, a pristine surface in a brightly lit corner of the lab, was a fusion of his two worlds. Next to a high-end workstation running complex simulation software, there was a small, framed photograph of him and Lena. In the picture, taken just last week, Lena was standing on the lawn outside a state-of-the-art rehabilitation center. She was beaming, her face full of the carefree joy that had been absent for so long. Later that afternoon, Marco stood quietly in the observation gallery of that same center, watching through a large pane of glass. Below, Lena was in a physical therapy session. She was laughing as she kicked a brightly colored ball to her therapist, her movements fluid and free of pain. The new medication, covered entirely by his insurance, had worked a miracle. She could run again. He watched her, a profound sense of peace settling over him. He hadn't just fixed broken machines. He had been given the tools to mend his sister's life, and in doing so had found the blueprint for his own. Late that night, long after the last engineer had gone home, Sophia sat alone in her office, the city lights of Port Sterling twinkling outside her window. She was reviewing the final presentation for a major investor, meeting the next day, the one that would secure Etheria's future for the next 5 years. The key slide showcased their new microactuator, now codenamed Valerio, its performance metrics exceeding all industry standards. Her eyes drifted to a corner of her minimalist desk. There, on a small, polished mahogany base, sat the brass songbird. Marco had given it to her at the end of his first week, its brass body polished to a brilliant shine, its mechanism tuned to perfection. It was, he'd said, a thank you. Sophia reached out and gently nudged the bird's winding key. The familiar, soft whirring filled the quiet office, followed by that same, impossibly pure two-note chirp. The sound cut through her fatigue, a clear, bright note in the silence. It was a reminder of that gray afternoon, of the spark of genius she had almost missed. In offering Marco a hand, she had done more than save a gifted young man and his sister. She had found the missing gear for her own machine, the unconventional spark that had reignited her company's innovative soul, and in the process, reconnected her with the pure, unadulterated joy of creation that had started it all. The song of the bird was a testament to a simple, elegant truth. Sometimes, the most valuable systems are the human ones, and the most powerful connections are forged in the most unexpected of places.